When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because I wasn't hurt, I was. My heart felt like it had cracked in two. But after all these years, I had learned that sometimes silence says more than tears ever could. I still remember that afternoon so clearly. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway. The sunlight slipped through the curtains and landed across the dining table where I sat, folding the last of the laundry. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that used to make me feel grateful, the kind that used to mean home. But that day, everything felt different. She stood in front of me, her arms crossed, her words sharp but calm. "Mama, maybe it's time you went back to your own place." My own place. Those words echoed in my mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. I didn't have another place. This was my home. I had helped raise her children, cooked her meals, stayed up at night when the baby was sick. I thought I belonged here. I thought kindness was enough. I wanted to ask her what I had done wrong. I wanted to remind her of the times I stood beside her, when no one else did. But my voice wouldn't come out. It felt as though all my years of love, patience, and care had suddenly turned into something invisible. Something that no longer mattered. So I smiled. Not because I agreed, but because I didn't want her to see me fall apart. I folded the last towel neatly, placed it on the table, and said softly, "All right, dear. If that's what you feel is best." She didn't reply. She just turned away, busying herself with something in the kitchen, pretending not to notice the silence that had filled the room. As I packed my small bag that evening, I looked around one last time. The family photos on the wall, the ones I had arranged with so much care, now felt like strangers staring back at me. The laughter that once filled this house had faded into memories I could no longer touch. When I stepped outside, the air was cool. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and gray. I thought of all the years I had spent trying to make everyone happy, always saying yes, always putting others first. That was the moment it hit me. My kindness had never been strength in their eyes. It had always been weakness. I closed the gate quietly behind me and walked away, not knowing that this was just the beginning of a journey that would change how I saw love, family, and myself forever. I was never a loud person. I grew up in a quiet town where people spoke softly and worked hard. My parents taught me that kindness was the only real strength a person could have. My father used to say, "Don't let the world harden your heart, child. That's the only way you'll survive it." So I tried to live by that. I believed in love and patience, in the small acts that made life gentle. A warm meal, a helping hand, a kind word when someone was hurting. When I married my husband, Arun, I thought I was stepping into a forever kind of love. He wasn't rich, but he had a smile that could calm any storm. We built our life slowly, one day at a time. There were struggles, of course. Money was tight, dreams had to wait, but we had each other. And that, to me, was enough. When our son Rohan was born, I thought my heart might burst from joy. I remember holding him for the first time, so small, so fragile, and promising silently that I would never let him feel unloved. Every mother makes that promise, I suppose. As he grew up, I made sure he had everything I never did. He was a quiet boy like his father, but sharp. He would sit by my side when I cooked and ask endless questions about the world. I didn't always have the answers, but I loved the way his eyes lit up when I tried. Life moved like that for years, calm, simple, ordinary in the most beautiful way. We didn't have much, but our home was full of warmth. Arun would come home from work tired, and I'd have dinner waiting. Rohan would share his stories from school. There was laughter, sometimes arguments, but nothing that couldn't be softened by time. Then one day the laughter stopped. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Arun always worked late on Tuesdays. He didn't come home that night. There was an accident on the road. By morning, everything I knew had changed. Losing him was like losing the ground beneath my feet. For weeks, I moved like a shadow, speaking less, eating less, just existing. Rohan was still young then, in his final year of college. I tried not to let him see me break. I wanted him to believe I was strong. But strength, I learned, isn't about pretending you're fine. It's about finding reasons to keep going when you don't feel like it. So I worked. I cooked for neighbors, stitched clothes, helped at the temple. Anything to keep the house running, Anything to keep my boys' dreams alive. Years passed. Rohan finished his studies, got a job in the city, and soon after, he told me he was getting married. I was happy for him, truly. His bride, Mira, seemed polite when I first met her. She was modern, confident, and a bit distant, but I didn't mind. I thought it would take time for her to open up. I told myself love always grows, even slowly. The wedding was beautiful. I stood in the corner, watching my son start his new life, and my heart swelled with pride. When they moved into the city apartment, Rohan asked me to come stay with them for a few months. I hesitated. I didn't want to intrude, but he insisted. So, I went. And that's where the second part of my life began. At first, everything was fine. Mira was busy adjusting to married life, and I tried to make myself useful. I cooked breakfast, cleaned the house, watered the plants. I never wanted to be a burden. I told myself that love meant helping, and helping meant belonging. But slowly, small cracks began to appear. Not loud or sudden, but quiet ones that made you question your place without anyone saying it directly. Mira started changing the way she spoke to me. At first, it was just tiny remarks. "Auntie, you don't have to worry about the kitchen. Or you rest, I'll handle it." It sounded polite, but there was a certain edge to it, something that told me she didn't really want my help. I would step back, smile, and say, "All right, dear." I thought giving her space was kindness. But soon kindness began to feel like invisibility. She started doing things differently, rearranging the shelves I had organized, changing recipes I'd cooked for years, sighing softly when I offered suggestions. Once she told Rohan in front of me, "Your mother worries too much. She should just relax and enjoy life." He laughed, not noticing how much those words stung. I didn't say anything. I just smiled again, the same smile that hides more than it shows. As months passed, Mira's tone became sharper. She started closing the kitchen door when she cooked. She'd speak to me less, sometimes not at all. I tried to start conversations, small things about her work, the children, but her answers grew shorter. Rohan, caught up in his job, barely noticed. When he did come home, Mira would be all smiles, serving him food, asking about his day. The house looked happy again for a few hours, and I would quietly slip away to my room, letting them have their time. I told myself this was normal, that daughters-in-law and mothers-in-law always had to adjust. I thought patience would heal things. But I was wrong. Patience without respect turns into pain. Still, I couldn't bring myself to complain. I kept doing what I always did. Being kind, being quiet, believing that love would find its way back. And perhaps that was my biggest mistake. Because soon, kindness wouldn't be enough to keep my place in the home I helped build. Life in their house became a rhythm I didn't recognize anymore. Days started early, but not with laughter or chatter. The mornings were quiet, too quiet. I would wake before everyone else, as I always had, and prepare tea. For years, that simple ritual meant love. The smell of boiling ginger and cardamom, the soft clink of cups, those were the sounds of family to me. But now the kitchen didn't feel like mine. The first few mornings I would make the tea for everyone, place it neatly on the table, and wait. Mira would come out, look at the cups and say gently, "Oh auntie, you didn't have to make this." I was about to. It was meant kindly maybe. But slowly, those small moments started to make me feel unnecessary. After a few weeks, I stopped making the tea. She didn't notice. That's how things began to change. Not with shouting, not with arguments, but with silence. Sometimes silence can be the loudest thing in a home. I started to spend more time in my room, reading old letters from Arun or flipping through photo albums. The pictures of Rohan as a little boy always brought both comfort and pain. I remembered how he used to run to me after school, his tiny hands clutching his notebooks, shouting, "Mama, look what I drew." Now he was a grown man with his own family, his own life, and I was just a quiet presence in the background. At first, I tried to stay positive. I told myself Mira was adjusting, that young people these days had different ways. I didn't want to make things hard for them. But one evening, something changed. It was Rohan's birthday. I had been secretly planning a small surprise. His favorite dish, gajar halwa, just like I used to make when he was a boy. I spent the afternoon cooking, carefully grating the carrots, stirring the milk, adding just the right amount of sugar. The smell filled the house, warm and familiar. It made me happy just for a little while. When Mira came home, she walked into the kitchen, frowned slightly and said, "Oh, you made sweets. I already ordered a cake." I smiled. "That's fine, dear. He'll love both." She didn't smile back. "But the cake's enough. We don't want to waste food." I nodded, quietly covering the pot. That evening, when the guests came, no one even mentioned the halwa. It sat on the counter untouched, cooling, until I quietly packed it away later. After everyone left, Rohan thanked me for helping with the decorations. But he never noticed that I hadn't eaten. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard them laughing in the living room. It was a small sound, but it pierced me like a blade. I turned to the wall and whispered to myself, "This is what love becomes sometimes, distant, polite, and silent." Days turned into months. Mira and Rohan were busy with their jobs. I kept myself occupied, watering the plants, mending small things around the house, cooking when asked. But I could feel my space shrinking, like a candle melting slowly in its own wax. Sometimes Mira would speak to me kindly, almost apologetically, and I'd think things were getting better. But then just as quickly, something else would happen. A look, a sigh, a closed door. And I'd be back where I started. One morning she came to me and said, "Auntie, we're thinking of turning your room into a study. The kids can sleep there when we have guests. We'll move your things to the smaller room near the balcony." Her voice was polite. Her smile was tight. And my heart sank. That room had been mine since I'd moved in. A small corner where I kept Arun's photos, my books, my memories. But I nodded anyway. "Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best." That evening, I packed my belongings quietly. I touched the framed photograph of my husband and whispered, "We're moving again, Arun. Don't worry, it's just a smaller room." The next morning, when I saw my things neatly stacked near the balcony, I felt something close inside me. Not anger, just a deep, quiet ache. I didn't tell Rohan how I felt. He was so busy, always tired, always rushing. When he did notice, he just said, "Ma, it's temporary. Mira wants to organize things better." Temporary. That word carried so much weight. Because deep down, I started to realize, maybe I was the temporary one. Weeks later, a new wound came. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, cutting vegetables, when I overheard Mira talking on the phone. I didn't mean to listen, but her voice carried. She said softly, "I can't relax in my own house. His mother is always here, always doing things her way. I just want my own space." I froze. The knife slipped from my hand and clattered on the counter. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. That evening, I didn't speak much. I moved through the house like a ghost. Later, when Rohan asked if I was all right, I smiled and said, "Just tired." He nodded, distracted, and went back to checking his phone. That's when I realized, sometimes love blinds you to another person's pain. And sometimes kindness becomes so familiar that people stop seeing it altogether. As time went on, small things kept adding up. Mira started locking her bedroom door, even during the day. The children, when they came along, loved me at first. We would read stories and bake cookies together. But as they grew, I could feel her distance shaping theirs too. She would say things like, "Go play with Mama, Grandma needs to rest." Even when I wasn't tired, I would just smile, watching the little ones run off, pretending my heart didn't break a little each time. The truth is, I wasn't angry at her. I was hurt, confused, and lonely. I had given so much, and somehow, I'd become invisible. Every night, before sleeping, I'd whisper a prayer. Let tomorrow be softer. Let her see I mean no harm. But the days didn't soften. They grew colder, quieter. One morning, Mira told me that they'd be traveling abroad for a few weeks for Rohan's work. I helped them pack, made sure the house was in order. And when they left, I stood at the doorway waving until their car disappeared. The house was silent again, but this time it wasn't peace I felt. It was emptiness. Still, for those few weeks, I found something I hadn't felt in a long time. Freedom. I cooked what I wanted. I listened to the radio. I sat by the window without worrying if I was in someone's way. And I realized something important. The quiet wasn't as heavy when it was my own. When they returned, Mira seemed colder than before. She spoke less, avoided eye contact. Then one evening, the words came, the ones that changed everything. She stood by the table, her tone calm but final. "Mama, maybe it's time you went back to your own place." I remember that line like it was carved into stone. My hands trembled, but my voice stayed steady. I smiled, the way I always did, and said, "All right, dear." And just like that, years of love, patience, and sacrifice disappeared into silence. That night, as I packed my things, I felt tears welling up but refused to let them fall. I folded my clothes, wrapped Arun's photo carefully, and thought, maybe this is what life is, giving, until there's nothing left to give. I slept little that night. I listened to the sound of their laughter from the next room, soft and distant, like a memory I could no longer touch. By morning, I had decided I would leave quietly, without a word of complaint, because sometimes dignity is the only thing a person has left. The morning I left their house, the world was painfully quiet. Even the birds seemed unsure whether to sing. I had packed my things neatly, 2 small bags, one with clothes, one with memories. I took Arun's framed photo and the tiny wooden box that held his wedding ring. Everything else I left behind. When I stepped into the hallway, Mira was standing by the kitchen door. She didn't say much. Just a short nod. Rohan wasn't home. He had left early for work. Part of me was grateful. I didn't want him to see me leave. It would have been harder that way, for him, and maybe for me too. I slipped on my sandals and walked out the front door. The morning air was cold and clear. For a second, I turned back and looked at the house. The curtains were drawn. From outside it looked peaceful, beautiful even. No one would ever guess the stories the walls held inside. As I walked down the street, I thought about all the years I had spent giving, my time, my love, my patience, and how easily it had all faded away. But strangely, I didn't feel angry. I just felt empty. The road was long, and I had nowhere to go at first. My hometown was far away, and most of my relatives had moved on or lost touch. I didn't want to burden anyone. So I took the bus to a small town on the outskirts of the city, a place I'd only visited once before years ago for a wedding. When I arrived, I found a tiny room for rent near the temple. It was small, but it was mine. The walls were bare, and the air smelled of incense from the nearby shrine. I placed Arun's photo on the small table by the window and sat down beside it. For the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It was stillness, pure, gentle stillness. The days passed slowly. I started waking up early again, just like before, making tea for myself and sitting by the window to watch people go by. At first, I didn't know what to do with all that time. No one to cook for, no chores waiting, no voices calling me. Just me and my thoughts. Some nights, I would still hear Mira's words echo in my mind. "Maybe it's time you went back to your own place." And I would whisper to myself, "This is my own place now." It didn't happen overnight, but something inside me began to shift. A few days later, I went to the temple nearby. The priest's wife, an elderly woman named Kamala, noticed me sitting alone on the steps. She smiled and asked, "You're new here, aren't you?" I nodded. "Yes. I just moved." She sat beside me. "It's a peaceful town. You'll like it here." That was the beginning of something I didn't expect, friendship. Kamala would visit me often, bringing vegetables from her garden, or inviting me to small gatherings at the temple. I was hesitant at first. I had spent so long hiding my hurt behind quiet smiles that I didn't remember how to let people in again. But slowly, her warmth drew me out. One afternoon she asked me, "You live alone, child?" I hesitated. "Yes. My son has his own family now." She nodded, as if she understood everything I wasn't saying. Then she said something I'll never forget. "Alone doesn't mean unloved. Sometimes it means unburdened." Those words stayed with me. As the weeks turned into months, I started finding small ways to fill my days. I volunteered at the temple, helping distribute food to the poor. I taught a few neighborhood children how to read and write. Their laughter filled my little room like sunlight spilling through the windows. For the first time in years, I felt useful again, not out of duty, but out of choice. Still, there were nights when the memories returned. I would think of Rohan, wondering if he missed me. Sometimes, I'd imagine him sitting down to dinner, glancing at the empty chair where I used to be. Did he ever think of calling? He didn't. Not for weeks. Not for months. I told myself it was fine. He had his life, his responsibilities. But some nights, when the rain fell softly outside, I would press my hand to my heart and whisper, I hope he's well. Then one evening, the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Hello. I said softly. There was a pause. Then a familiar voice, uncertain, careful. Ma. It's me. My heart stopped. Rohan. Yes. Ma, how are you? I closed my eyes. The sound of his voice broke something open inside me. I'm all right. Beta. How are you? He hesitated. I'm okay. I didn't know where you were. Mira said you needed some time alone. I smiled sadly. Yes. I needed time to remember who I am. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Ma, can I visit you sometime? I wanted to say yes immediately, but fear held me back. I didn't know if it was guilt or genuine love that brought him to call. Still, I said softly, Of course, Beta. You're always welcome. After we hung up, I sat for a long time in the dim light, thinking about how distance changes people, not always for the worse, but often in ways we don't expect. When Rohan finally came a few weeks later, I almost didn't recognize him. He looked tired, older somehow. When he saw me, he smiled awkwardly and said, You've lost weight. I laughed gently. And you've lost your hair. He laughed too, and for a moment, it felt like nothing had changed. He stayed for tea. We didn't talk much about the past. I could sense the things he wanted to say, but couldn't find the words for. Still, his presence was enough. Before he left, he said quietly, Ma, Mira's been different lately. I think she misses you too. I looked at him, unsure what to believe, but instead of questioning, I simply said, I hope she's well. He smiled faintly, hugged me, and left. After he was gone, I stood by the window, looking out at the dusty road where his car disappeared. A strange calm settled over me. For the first time, I didn't ache for what I'd lost. I was grateful for what I'd learned. In the weeks that followed, life moved gently again. I started helping Kamala with her small community kitchen, feeding those who had no one. Every time I handed someone a plate of warm food, I felt something heal inside me. A small piece of the brokenness I had carried for years. Kindness, I realized, didn't lose its value just because others mistook it for weakness. It only lost meaning when I stopped believing in it myself. One evening, as I lit a small oil lamp before Arun's photo, I whispered, I used to think love meant giving until you disappeared. But now I know, love means giving without losing yourself. The flame flickered softly, as if agreeing with me. Then one morning, a letter arrived. It was from Mira. The handwriting was shaky, hesitant. I opened it slowly. Dear Ma, it began. I don't know how to start this. I've wanted to write for a long time, but I didn't know what to say. The house feels empty without you. I realize now how much you did, how much you cared, and how often I took that for granted. I'm sorry for the things I said, and for the things I didn't say. Rohan misses you every day. The children ask about you too. Please, if you can, come home. Not because we need your help, but because we need you. Tears rolled down my face before I even finished reading. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. That evening, I went to the temple. I sat quietly near the lampstand and closed my eyes. I thought of Mira, her words, her silence, her walls, and I realized something I hadn't before. She wasn't cruel. She was afraid. Afraid of being compared. Afraid of losing control. Afraid of love that didn't fit her understanding. And maybe in her own way, she too had been misunderstood. I felt a wave of forgiveness wash over me. Not forced, not dramatic, just a quiet release of all the pain I'd been holding. When I returned home, I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside Arun's photo. I looked out the window at the fading sunset and whispered, maybe it's time to go home. The next morning, I woke before sunrise. The letter still lay on the table, its edges curled from where my fingers had clutched it all night. I read it again, slowly this time. letting each word settle in the corners of my heart. There was no anger left in me, only a tired sort of peace. For the first time, the thought of going back didn't fill me with fear. It felt like returning to a house that needed its windows opened, to let the stale air out and the light back in. I packed my small bag. I didn't take much, just a few clothes, some sweets for the grandchildren, and Arun's photo. Before leaving, I lit one last lamp in the tiny room. The flame trembled in the morning breeze, and I whispered, "Thank you for giving me a place to heal." The journey back to the city felt longer than before. Every turn in the road brought a memory. Rohan's laughter, the first time I'd held my grandchild, the quiet moments when Mira and I had still been learning to live together. When the bus finally stopped near their street, my heart began to race. I stood for a moment outside their gate, clutching the handle of my bag. The house looked the same, cream-colored walls, the old jasmine creeper climbing the fence. Only the flowers were thicker now, as if they'd been waiting for me too. I pressed the bell. A moment later, Mira opened the door. She froze when she saw me. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then she stepped aside quietly and said, "Come in, Ma." Her voice was softer than I remembered. Inside, the air smelled of home, cooked rice, sandalwood, a faint trace of baby powder. My grandchildren came running the moment they saw me. "Dottie," they shouted, hugging my legs. Their laughter filled every empty corner of my heart. Mira stood watching, her eyes glistening. "They've missed you," she said. I smiled gently. "And I've missed them more." We sat in the living room. The same couch, the same curtains. It was as if time had paused here, waiting for us to catch up. Mira brought tea without a word. She set it down carefully, as though afraid to break something fragile. After a long silence, she said, "I wasn't fair to you." I looked at her. We all make mistakes when we're learning to share a home. She shook her head. "No, Ma. I thought you were trying to control everything. I didn't understand that you were just trying to help. I saw your kindness as interference. I was wrong." Her voice trembled. She looked down, twisting the edge of her dupatta. I reached across the table and touched her hand. "It takes courage to say that. I forgave you long ago." Tears spilled down her cheeks. She covered my hand with hers and whispered, "Will you stay?" I hesitated. The old wound flickered inside me, but this time it didn't burn. "Only if you truly want me to," I said. "I do," she whispered. "Not because we need you, but because we love you." When Rohan returned from work that evening, he stopped at the doorway, stunned. Then his face broke into a wide, boyish grin. "Ma." He came forward and hugged me so tightly I could hardly breathe. For a moment, all the years between us vanished. He smelled of dust and tiredness, but to me it was the scent of my little boy who'd once come home from school, proud of his drawings. "I'm home, Beta," I said softly. He nodded, still holding me. "You never really left, Ma. Not from here." He tapped his chest. The days that followed were gentle. There were still unspoken things between us, but the silence no longer felt like distance. It was a silence filled with care, the kind that comes after a storm when everyone is simply grateful the walls are still standing. I began cooking again, only sometimes. Mira and I worked together in the kitchen now, side by side. She'd ask me how much spice to add or how long to simmer the curry. I'd tease her about the way she cut vegetables too thick and she'd laugh. It felt natural, easy. One afternoon as we prepared lunch, she said quietly, "You know, when you left, the house felt empty. I didn't realize how much warmth you brought until it was gone." I smiled. Sometimes people need distance to see what was close all along. She nodded, her eyes soft. "I just hope it's not too late." "It's never too late," I said. The grandchildren became my joy again. Every evening, they'd come running to my room with their books and stories. I helped them with homework, listened to their little worries, and told them bedtime tales about their grandfather. One night, the older one asked, "Dottie, were you sad when you lived alone?" I smiled and kissed his forehead. "A little. But sadness teaches us what matters most." "What did it teach you?" he asked. "That kindness is a gift, not a weakness," I said. "Even when people don't understand it, never stop being kind." He nodded solemnly, as though he understood. Weeks turned into months. The house was alive again. Not with perfection, but with acceptance. Mira began inviting me to accompany her to small gatherings, and sometimes we'd sit on the balcony sharing tea in the evening light. One day, she showed me a small notebook. Inside were recipes I had once made, the same dishes she used to criticize quietly. "I've been collecting them," she said shyly, "so the children will know how you cooked." I looked through the pages and felt tears blur my vision. "They'll remember through you," I whispered. She smiled, wiping her eyes. "Through us." Sometimes late at night, I still wake and sit by the window. The city hums softly outside, and the moonlight spills across the floor. I think of the time I spent alone, the pain, the silence, the quiet rebirth. I realize now that leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was the middle, the part where I had to lose myself to find what truly mattered. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply frees the heart from carrying it. A few months later, Mira organized a small family lunch at home. She asked me to sit at the head of the table. "You've earned this place, Ma," she said. As everyone gathered, the laughter, the clinking of plates, the children's chatter, I looked around and felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years. When Mira served me food first, I caught her hand gently. "You don't have to." She shook her head. "I want to." And in that moment, I realized that kindness, when given freely, always finds its way back. Sometimes late, sometimes quiet, but it returns. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Rohan came to my room. He sat beside me, his face serious. "Ma," he said, "I should have stood up for you earlier. I saw what was happening, but I thought things would fix themselves. I was wrong." I placed my hand on his. "You were trying to keep peace, Beta. Sometimes silence is love too, even if it hurts." He shook his head. "I'll never let that happen again." I smiled. "You won't need to. We've all learned." He hugged me tightly. "I love you, Ma." "I know," I whispered. "I always did." As I lay in bed later, the night breeze carrying the faint scent of jasmine through the window, I thought about the long road that had brought me here. My kindness had once been taken for weakness. But now I saw it differently. Kindness was never the problem. The problem was forgetting that I, too, deserved it. Love is not measured by how much you give, but by how gently you hold yourself when others don't see your worth. The next morning, I woke early and stepped out to the garden. The sun was just rising, painting everything gold. Mira was already there, watering the plants. She looked up and smiled. "Good morning, Ma," she said. "Good morning, dear." We stood there for a while in comfortable silence. Then I said softly, "The jasmine's blooming beautifully this year." She nodded. "Maybe because it knows you're home." I laughed quietly. "Maybe it's because it forgives easily." She looked at me, understanding the deeper meaning. "Then let's be like the jasmine," she said. And in that simple moment, surrounded by morning light and the soft scent of flowers, I knew the story had come full circle. Not in grand gestures or apologies, but in the quiet acceptance that love, even when bruised, can bloom again. It's been a year now since I returned home. Sometimes I sit by the same window where I once watched the rain and wonder how much has changed, or maybe, how much I have changed. The house feels different now. It's not quieter or busier. It's just warmer. There is laughter that doesn't feel forced, conversations that don't carry weight. Even the silences are softer. I often think back to those days when I believed that kindness meant staying quiet, doing more, expecting less. I thought that love had to come from sacrifice, that the more I gave, the more people would understand me. But life has its own way of teaching us. Sometimes the world doesn't value gentleness until it's gone. Sometimes you have to step away, not to punish others, but to remind yourself that you matter too. When I left home, I thought I was walking away from everything I had built. But now I see, I was walking toward myself, toward a version of me that could still be kind, but also strong enough to set boundaries, that could still love, but not at the cost of her peace. My kindness was never weakness. It was my strength all along. I just hadn't learned how to protect it. Sometimes Mira and I talk about that time. Not to reopen the wound, but to understand it better. She often says, "I wish I had listened sooner." And I tell her, "Maybe if you had, we would never have learned what we know now." She smiles when I say that. We've both learned that love is not about being right or wrong. It's about choosing to start again, even after you've been hurt. My grandchildren are growing fast. They come home with drawings and stories, their little hands sticky with sweets, their eyes full of questions. When they fight or cry, I tell them gently, "Don't let anger live too long in your heart. It's heavy to carry." Sometimes when they do something kind, sharing their toys, helping a friend, I whisper to myself, "Yes, that's how it begins. That's how it continues." Because maybe that's the real purpose of kindness. Not to be noticed or praised, but to keep passing it forward. Quietly, steadily, until it becomes part of someone else's heart too. On quiet evenings, I still light a lamp near Arun's photo. I tell him about the day, the laughter, the small moments, the peace I found. And in that golden flicker, I almost hear his voice saying, "You see, you were never weak. You just loved too deeply." I smile. "And that's okay," I whisper back. "If I've learned one thing, it's this. Life will not always reward your goodness right away. Some people will misunderstand it, some will take it for granted, and some will hurt you because of it. But that should never stop you from being kind. Kindness is not a transaction. It's a reflection of who you are, and no one can take that away. It may bend you for a while, but it will never break you, because true strength doesn't shout. It forgives. It lets go. It keeps loving, even after the heart has been bruised." Tonight, as I sit here with the soft hum of the city outside, I think of that first day, the one when Mira told me to leave, and I smiled instead of crying. Back then, that smile came from heartbreak. Now it comes from peace. Because I finally understand, my kindness was never my weakness. It was my greatest power. And when the world took it for granted, I didn't lose it. I just learned how to carry it differently, with quiet dignity, and a heart that still believes in love.